Gospel reading we've just listened to this morning takes us back to the appearances of the risen Lord to his disciples on the evening of Easter Day. He specifically points out his wounds as evidence that the one standing before them was indeed the same one who had been crucified. So Luke tells us that the Lord then explained the meaning of his death and resurrection to his disciples. He concluded with the words, "So you see how it is written that the Christ would suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and that in his name repentance for the forgiveness of sins would be preached to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem." The appearances of the risen Lord confirmed the faith of his disciples so that they could preach Christ, crucified and risen, and as he commanded, to all the nations. Perhaps it was consciousness of this instruction of the Lord that inspired a young priest, Philip Connolly, an Irish priest who was ordained in 1814 and was then working in a parish in Dublin in Ireland, to volunteer to serve the remote British penal colony of New South Wales. The government in London had given permission for 2 priests to serve the Catholics, particularly those among the convict population. Their intention was that the clergy might help in their moral and civil rehabilitation. And for some of the Irish convicts, a number of whom were political prisoners, it was hoped that the priests might temper their spirit of rebellion and encourage them to be good citizens. So arriving in Sydney on May the 3rd, 1820, with his companion, Father John Joseph Terry, he spent the best part of the year there before deciding that it would be he, of the 2 of them, who would go to the second major colonial centre, Hobarton, in Van Diemen's Land. So he arrived here in Tasmania, as we heard, from Sydney aboard a ship, the Prince Leopold, on the 14th of April, 1821. As we heard too, arriving in Hobarton, he was able to obtain lodging with the family of one Edward Kerr. Indeed, he would actually remain with this family until 1823, when they decided to return to England. Edward Kerr was a wholesale and retail merchant, and he had a store in Brisbane Street, down the bottom of Brisbane Street. And it was there that Father Connolly celebrated his first Mass in Van Diemen's Land the following day. At that Mass, there were 9 people present. His early work involved baptisms. There hadn't been a priest really in Van Diemen's Land before him. And also celebrating the Catholic marriage of a number of couples, some of whom actually had been married by the Church of England chaplain, a Robert Knopwood. In fact, Knopwood, who had a house over in Bellerive, became a very close friend of Connolly, and they often dined in one another's residences, seemingly enjoying a pipe and a quiet drink. As Connolly was dying here on this site, it was the Anglican priest who was attentive to him. Though there was a small group of Catholics who were free citizens, and among them, of course, were a number of soldiers, the bulk of his ministry would be among the convicts transported from England. One of his early duties, 2 weeks upon his arrival on the 28th of April, was to prepare 4 convicts to face death by hanging. This remained a necessary part of his priestly ministry for the years that followed. Connolly commented that some convicts remained quite obstinate, while others did respond to his ministrations as they faced the gallows. His experience was not dissimilar to that of the Lord's on Calvary, when one thief abused him, while the other asked for mercy, and mercy he received. 4 times a year for the next 14 years, he would take the long and arduous overland journey to Launceston to provide Mass for Catholics there, often going on further to Port Dalrymple, Georgetown, at the head of the Tamar. He said his first Mass there for a small number of soldiers on the 1st of June, 1821, after having attended 4 convicts who were executed the previous day. He was granted this property here on Harrington Street, bordered by Brisbane and Patrick Streets, by Governor Sorrell. And in July 1821, he appealed for donations so that he could build a church here. The very first Catholic church in Tasmania was a rather modest building made of rough wood, which he obtained from the government, and built on a simple stone foundations. He named it in honour of an Irish medieval astronomer, St. Virgil, and it stood a little higher up on the hill than the location of the present cathedral, probably now where St. Virgil's primary school is currently situated, just above us. Bishop Poynter, the Catholic bishop in London, sent him a set of vestments, chalices and books which he was able to use for celebration of Mass. And later, in 1824, a set of 6 large candles and an altar cross were donated by an Irish benefactor and brought to Tasmania by a Carmelite priest, Father Coote, and they are currently on the altar today. He continued to use the chapel he built for the celebration of Mass during the time of his ministry here in Tasmania, although he did attempt to build a larger church further up the hill. However, it never eventuated. He built a house next to the church and he named it Killard, and he would live there for the duration of his time in Hobart. Father Connolly died in 1839 and was buried in the Catholic cemetery that he had established above Barrack Street, where Guildford Young College stands today. When the construction of St Virgil's Secondary School began in 1916, the graves on the property were opened and the remains taken to Cornelian Bay Cemetery. Father Connolly's remains were exhumed and reinterred under the northern transept of the cathedral, joining the other bishops who were buried there, so just over here. We intend to restore the floor of the cathedral this year, hopefully this year, maybe next year. And during that time, we will exhume the bodies of Father Connolly and also the other 4 bishops who are buried there, and then we'll reinter them in the crypt, which we now have established here on the cathedral property. In 1823, he opened a school, which was the second Catholic school in Australia. It was just across the road, here on Harrington Street. The teacher was a man called John Wade, who was an ex-convict. And the school soon had 50 students, quite a number of whom were Protestant. Father Connolly did hold out the hope that these children would be, as he expressed it, initiated into the duties of religion. I think it's true to say that Father Connolly's ministry was difficult, and he found it hard. He felt, and he expressed, that he'd made very little spiritual progress among the people. He experienced many convicts who, in his words, were depraved and were unrepentant. And he was appalled by the extent of drunkenness in the colony. And he described what he described as notoriously immoral conduct. He carried out his ministry as the only resident priest in Tasmania until shortly before his death. But his faithful service laid foundations upon which others would build. So today, as we celebrate this significant anniversary, let's take a moment to recognise the sacrifice and pastoral service of our founding priest, Father Philip Connolly, who Father Terry Sutherwood described in his biography of this pioneer priest as the lonely shepherd in Van Diemen's Land.